This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate to have a distinguished guest who's a dear friend, Mike Kugelman. Mike is the South Asia Institute Director at the Woodrow Wilson Center, where he is responsible for research, for programming, and publication on the region. His main area of specialty is Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan, and U.S. relations with each of the South Asian nations. He writes monthly column for Foreign Policy South Asia Channel. He's also a dear friend, and thank you, Mike, for coming to our show, and welcome to our show.
Thank you, Frank. It's so great to be back here with you, and I really look forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. So, Mike, you are among the foremost South Asia expert, as Tarun Basu said, as a lot of people think that that's the case, that has only in recent time grown in prominence in American foreign policy. What was the reason for your interest in South Asia? And tell us a little bit about, and also I want you to know, how high do you think South Asia will figure in American foreign policy under this administration?
Yeah, well, thanks. And I appreciate the kind words. They may be too kind. I feel that I'm always a student of the region. And indeed, it's been quite a few years, nearly 2 decades that I've been studying South Asia, but I feel there's always so much to learn still. So in terms of
no connection to South Asia, right?
No direct connection, indeed. But in terms of why I decided to make a career of it, I should be honest, it was not a lifelong dream. I grew up overseas because of my parents' work, but I didn't live in South Asia. I lived in Japan, I lived in East Asia, and I lived in Europe. But essentially, it was when I was in graduate school. I took a course, my very first semester, on a whim, on the history of the political history of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I thought it was a fascinating course. I found it so interesting, and I decided at that point to essentially to study South Asia and U.S. foreign policy, and that's what I did in graduate school, and the rest was history, so to speak. Now, in terms of how significant South Asia will be for this administration, of course, this administration, we have an election coming fairly soon, but I think at this point, South Asia is definitely not as high up on the radar as the Middle East, for obvious reasons, Europe and East Asia. But I would argue that South Asia has become a more prominent issue in Washington, seen from a strategic lens, mainly because of great power rivalry. That's really the main reason. U.S.-China competition is everything in U.S. foreign policy. And as China has deepened its presence and its influence in South Asia, I think that's gotten the attention of U.S. policymakers in recent years. And that's one of the big reasons why we've seen the U.S. step up engagement with many, if not most, South Asian states over the last few years.
And you said you went to school at American University, correct?
Yes, as an undergraduate, indeed.
And the graduates, you were graduate students where?
That was at the Fletcher School at Tufts.
Oh, I know, Fletcher School of Business. It's business, right?
No, international relations, or law and Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy is what it's called.
I'm on the board of American University, so that's the reason I asked.
Oh, interesting. Great to know. Well, it's a great institution, and it's a very impressive institution. I'm not sure if I were to apply to get in now, I'm not sure I'd get in.
Well, I don't think I can get in. So my question to you is, South Asia has largely been outside the radar of the American community, as you said, while East Asia got much more attention. As you understand, the Wilson Center is one of the few American think tanks with the South Asia specialization. So my question to you is, what was the reason of the neglect of a region whose population comprised nearly a fifth of the human race? So tell us a little bit about what's your interest is in South Asia and why it is there in the Wilson Center.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, indeed, if you look over recent history, one could argue that during the Cold War, particularly during the latter decades of the Cold War. South Asia became very, very prominent in U.S. thinking because of the Cold War, because of U.S. Soviet state of play, and this is something that became a pretty significant thing, but obviously that didn't last forever. The Cold War ended, and then we got into a point where we went into the early 2000s and the post 9/11 era, where the U.S. tended to look at South Asia through separate silos. Right, it was fighting its war in Afghanistan on the one hand. It was also trying to strengthen relations with India, and it was also trying to come out with some type of workable relationship with Pakistan. Though that relationship was very much tied to U.S. goals in Afghanistan, but that was pretty much it. You had those three separate silos, and the U.S. wasn't really according much strategic attention to South Asia. So in terms of what's happening now, I mentioned before, I think that intensifying great power competition is a big reason. And for me and for the Wilson Center, our view is that we can't afford to overlook this region. Certainly for the reason you mentioned, just because it's such a large region with such a large share of the world's population. But there's just so much. There's just so much happening there, and certainly you could look at it from a great power competition lens. That you have countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and the Maldives that have become battlegrounds for
That
great
is
power
correct.
competition between India and China, and to
Right.
an extent the U.S. And China. You also have Russia very quietly having stepped up its influence in places like Bangladesh. It's long been a close partner of India. Russia does not have any enemies in South Asia, so that helps it deepen its own influence. And this is something that clearly is significant for the U.S. and U.S. interests. But I would argue that one of the major reasons we wanted to launch this institute is that we think that for too long it's been the same few countries in South Asia that tend to get the most attention in Washington for good reason. India deserves a lot of attention. Afghanistan, we were fighting a war there for many years, and then Pakistan as well, which has its own strategic significance. But our view is that it's important to provide more understanding and highlight the what's happening in places like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, the entire SARC region, for a number of reasons, one being the great competition factor. So one of the broader goals of the South Asia Institute is to essentially deepen Washington's intellectual and strategic focus in South Asia beyond India and beyond Pakistan. And we also are looking to provide platforms for voices from South Asia. We think that Washington needs to hear more from authentic, credible voices from the region, and not only U.S. voices or American voices commenting on the region. That's important too, but I think for the sake of authenticity and diversity, you want to be able to provide opportunities for scholars and researchers and policymakers and so on from the broader South Asia region to be involved in policy debates in Washington. And along those lines, we have some fellowship programs, including a Pakistan fellowship program, which allows
Oh,
us to bring someone,
oh, wonderful.
yeah, to bring a thought leader from Pakistan to the Wilson Center every year to work on some type of research project.
And how you have one for India, one for Pakistan, both?
Yeah, we don't have a separate country specific program for India. We do
Okay, so
have
you have one for
fellows
South
from
Asia.
India,
Okay.
but yeah. Mhm.
Well, let's talk about the just concluded Indian election. You know, what does it say for Indian democracy, and what are the takeaways from this election? I know, and how long do you think the Modi coalition will last? What will happen to Modi 3.0? It didn't do well. Modi only got 240 seats, and they have a coalition with with the Nitish Kumar in Bihar and the one in Assam. Is that correct?
Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Andhra Pradesh. Okay. Do you think they will last? And what will happen to the home ministers and rest of the ministers? They will be all gone. It sounds like it.
Yeah.
So give
Oh,
us a little bit what's going on there. And why did Modi 3.0 didn't do very well? 240 seats, while India, which is opposition with Rahul Gandhi came to our house, you know that. I think
mhm.
I invited you. And he has a 232 seats, 230 seats, right? So there's not that much difference.
Well, I mean, the BJP and Modi's party still got the most seats by far in terms of other parties. But indeed, as you say, it did much worse than expected, and the opposition alliance did much better than expected. And Modi had been saying that the BJP alliance could get 400 seats
He did.
out of the 543 that there are, and no, he didn't get anywhere close to that. And in fact, the alliance, the BJP plus the electoral alliance partners didn't even get 300, which is a remarkable setback. I think there's so many reasons to explain what went wrong. I think one of them is economic stress. You have this persistent problem of unemployment. Inflation has been rough in some parts of India, and I think for many Indians, they thought that he hadn't done a good enough job of dealing with those issues. I'd also argue that there was some pushback and a backlash to Modi's signature, ideological bent, his Hindu nationalism, and also what I would describe, quite frankly, as repressive and indeed perhaps even autocratic tendencies of the Modi government. And I think there's pushback against all that. And finally, he's been in office for 10 years. There have been other Indian prime ministers that have been in power for 10 years, but still that's a long time for a democratically elected leader. And I think that for many Indians, the conclusion is that he had lost some of his shine and he wasn't able to connect with people as well as he had a decade ago. So I think that, and also we have to give credit to the opposition. They were very savvy in terms of how they
They were
awarded
very,
tickets. Yeah, and that doesn't get enough attention. So, in terms of what to expect, things change by the day. So I won't. All I'll say on this is that this will indeed be the first time that Modi has to lead a government within a coalition. He's never had to do that as prime minister or as chief minister in Gujarat, and I think that his political style doesn't necessarily lend itself to the type of political skills necessary to succeed in coalition governments with compromise and consensus and all of that. And I think that when it comes to his domestic agenda, particularly his economic reform plans, and indeed his social agenda, his Hindu nationalist agenda, there could be a bit of dissension within the coalition just because, you mentioned the two main coalition partners. Ideologically, they're very different from the BJP, and they have that both of them count on significant numbers of Indian Muslim constituencies. So that could be a bit of a challenge. I think he'll be okay. Modi, he's still very popular and powerful, as is his party. He'll be obviously the senior. His party will be the senior member of the coalition. I think foreign policy, there's going to be a lot more agreement, so things will be fine there. But it'll be a test for him, for sure. I mean, especially as he's in his third term. We don't know how much longer he'll want to be in politics. People will be watching to see if he's able to manage this challenge of leading a coalition.
So my question to you is, first of all, he's 74 years old now.
Yeah.
I think this probably will be the end of his, what I consider the election cycles, and somebody else will take it over. Maybe the Congress Party, maybe India, I do not know.
Yeah, I mean, that's unclear. I mean, the BJP, as you may know, has internal rules that say that you can't stand for office if you're 75 or older. So that would rule him out for another
Oh,
term.
okay. So they
But
still have that.
yeah, but I've heard leaders, including I believe Amit Shah, the very powerful former home
Yeah, but
minister.
Amit Shah may not be there, as I understand, because the political differences between the coalitions and him and the BJP.
Yes.
I understand. I do not know.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. What I was saying is that I think that he has actually said that we shouldn't rule out Modi wanting to stay around beyond a third term. So it's
Okay.
unclear, but it's interesting. There's been so much talk about successors. Yogi Adityanath, who's the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, a very, very prominent, powerful, influential BJP
He
leader. A
didn't do
very
very well.
Yeah, he's what's that?
He didn't do very well with the
He didn't
Lok
do very
Sabha
well,
election.
exactly. His
He,
state, yeah, his state did very poorly, and he has been seen as on the short list of possible Modi successors. But I wonder if Uttar Pradesh not doing well in this election could impact his how he's seen within the party. We'll see.
well, but I think the Samajwadi Party did better than him,
Exactly,
his party.
indeed. The BJP finished second. It's remarkable.
It is remarkable. And also the fact is the place that Ayodhya, is that what they call them? The one they
Mhm.
talked about the demolishing the Babur's mask to something else, to the Hindu temple. The person who won the election is not from BJP, is from
Indeed.
lower caste.
And I think that that reflects how there are limits to the political appeal of Hindu nationalism, right? I mean, as I understand it, the area where the temple was constructed, you've got a lot of poor families, and
That
some
is
people have
correct.
been displaced for the temple to be built. They felt that they were being ignored. And see, for them, that gets back to the issues of privation that I mentioned earlier. And you build a temple, that's not going to ensure you have food on the table, right? So,
So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. It doesn't look like it doesn't look very promising.
sorry, what doesn't look promising?
His government will last that long, and his coalition partner will last that long. I do not know. I do not know.
Right.
You,
Yeah, I think it'll be all right. But yeah, I mean, it only takes one big disagreement to collapse the government, right? I mean, if a coalition partner backs out of something, then that could be it. But I mean, Modi's still a pretty savvy political figure. I imagine he'll keep the coalition together.
but he will have an opposition with Rahul Gandhi and the rest of the Congress party, and that will be very difficult for him to challenge. And also in the parliament, as I understand, they have to get a consensus before they can pass any bill.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the opposition is energized, it's emboldened. It's definitely gonna try to be an obstacle, I think, to legislative priorities of the coalition government. So that's a challenge. That's another challenge. That's another problem for Modi.
So the PM, as we understand, PM Nawaz Sharif recently said Pakistan betrayed India by violating an agreement he had signed with then Prime Minister Vajpayee by launching the Kargil conflict. How do you see that statement, and what effect might it have on the future of bilateral ties, which is still frozen in a way? I don't see anything about India and Pakistan. Do you think this government, the new government, will basically have a little bit ties with the Pakistan?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've been described as
Doesn't look very promising.
no, I don't think so. I think that Modi will want to keep things the way they were, and that's basically ensuring that the relationship doesn't spiral out of control. I don't think he wants things to get worse with Pakistan because he wants to be able to focus on China, which is the biggest strategic challenge. But I think that he has no incentive in trying to make the relationship better either for political reasons. And, I think that for Modi, it's almost been a decade ago, he made that surprise visit to Pakistan to meet Nawaz Sharif when he was prime
Right.
minister.
He did. He did.
And soon after he came back to India, there was a terrible terrorist attack that killed a number of Indian soldiers, and it was traced back to Pakistan. And I think that after that, Modi lost interest in trying to reach out. So yeah, I don't see any changes in India's policy toward Pakistan, and I think in Pakistan, so long as Modi is the leader, will not really have much interest in engaging as well. And you know what, Frank? They both have conditions that they've imposed for better relations that aren't going to be met, right? India has said Pakistan has to deal more with its terrorism problem. Pakistan says there is no terrorism problem, and Pakistan says that India has to change its policies in Kashmir, but India is not going to change those policies. So they're sort of stuck.
Maybe the new government could do that. I do not. We do not know.
No, we don't. But I think especially having a smaller mandate and less political space to operate, I don't think Modi's going to want to be experimenting in bold ways by trying to reach out to Pakistan. I just don't see that coming.
Okay. And also, Pakistan is not doing very well economically, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's really needing to get a new IMF loan. It's working on that now.
That
It
is correct.
avoided a default last year, but one can't rule out another risk of a default down the road if it's not able to get more IMF assistance. I mean,
Right.
inflation has come down. Some things are looking up, but it's in a fragile state, and it's just has a lot of turbulence and political volatility as well. And there's this confrontation between the military and Imran Khan and his supporters, and China is very concerned about security risks in Pakistan. China is a key donor, so it's a bit of a delicate situation for Pakistan.
Very well said. You have also said that Afghanistan presents a messy picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
After 4 decades of war, how much of that blame would you lay at the doors of American policy for the chaotic withdrawal from the country 4 years ago? What lessons have you learned? Do you think the president Biden, who did this thing, will pay the price in terms of polling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember getting this question a lot in August 2021 when the U.S. pulled out. I think that at one point there was a view that the very chaotic last few weeks of the U.S. withdrawal could be costly for Biden politically. But honestly, I think Americans in many cases have short memories, and now the big focus is on the war in the Middle East. I think that this
That
is
is correct.
outside. Yeah, and
Right.
I think that's where there could be some political cost. I mean, I think this is a bad
Especially in
thing.
Michigan, especially in Michigan.
Yes, exactly. I think it's a bad thing that people aren't really talking about Afghanistan in the government, which is very sad because there's so many very troubling things happening there. So I don't think Afghanistan will be a big campaign issue. We'll see, but I think that it's going to be more to the extent that foreign policy figures in the campaigns, it'll probably be the Middle East, and certainly China is something that's going to come up. But the big issue now is the Middle East and the war and the Israel Hamas war.
Do you think there will be compromise in terms of having a ceasefire there between
Well,
Israel and the Gaza?
Well, I mean, that's clearly what the Biden administration is really pushing for, and
That's what
certainly,
I was told.
yeah. I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but certainly, anytime there's an opportunity to stop the fighting, you try to take advantage. So I hope, my goodness, I mean, it's a terrible war. I hope that it ends sooner rather than later. But
Palestinian paying the price.
yeah, oh, absolutely. And also all these Israeli hostages, all these Israelis that are being kept hostage still. It's terrible. And
It is a terrible situation. I agree. So, how importantly will energy play in the future of U.S. policy towards South Asia and the internal dynamics of South Asia? Do you know South Asia faces a substantial challenge in its growing energy needs, and they cannot rely upon the oils imported from a Middle East country, and they cannot also rely on the fossil fuels and the coal power. So do you think the solar energy and the green energy will play an important role
I
in
certainly
India
hope
and
so.
Pakistan?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I
Yeah,
certainly hope so. I mean, that's the future. And it's interesting that we look at yes, you're right. I mean, the energy profile in many countries of South Asia, not all of them, but many of them, is just not enough indigenous resources and having to depend on expensive imports from the Middle East. And there's some exceptions. Nepal, for example, is very rich in hydropower
yes, that
and
is
so on.
true. Hydropower has played an important role for them, right? But this
Right.
is a small country is not is still it cannot import the energy to some other countries as well.
Right, exactly. So we are seeing, particularly in India, these revolutions, these green energy revolutions, where you've got these major new strategies and policies to transition to a greener economy and to transition into a broader, greener energy state of affairs. And India has actually done fairly well on this. It's been able
Yeah.
to grow out a new this its green hydrogen sector is moving very quickly. EVs have become a big growth sector in India. And if you look at the donors, it's interesting that China is now investing its Belt and Road Initiative, its investments in energy. It's not doing any more coal investments abroad. It's ruled that out. It's focusing more on clean energy. And so this is something that's beneficial for Pakistan and other countries in South Asia that receive assistance from China. But on the U.S. front, it's very interesting that we have. I'm sure you know about this, Frank. The International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, which is an
Yeah, I
investment
do.
arm of the U.S. government. And in South Asia, it is emphasizing clean energy infrastructure investments. And India, I believe, has one of the largest, if not the largest, energy. India is the largest portfolio for the DFC in South Asia. There have been a number of clean energy investments announced there. And the big one that was in the news for a lot some weeks back was the DFC investing $500 million in a port development in Sri Lanka, interestingly, in partnership with Gautam Adani of India's Adani Group. That's not an energy investment; it's just plain infrastructure. But yeah, the DFC is very focused on clean energy, and now, of course, we have an election coming. If Donald Trump were to come back, I'm not sure if there'd be that same priority for clean energy investments. It may be more focused on other forms of energy. But for now, I think that U.S. policy in South Asia, a lot of it is seen through this idea of energy assistance, clean energy assistance, and of course, there's a great power competition lens to that. The goal is to push back against what China has been doing on that front in South Asia.
Well, both India and Pakistan receives a lot of, what I consider the solar energy could play a very important role for them.
Yeah, because the weather is perfect for that, right?
The
And
weather is perfect for
wind,
them.
wind as well. But I think that the issue is, they have the same issue, well, the same challenges that have been there for a long time. One is storage capacity. This is
Right.
something that India needs more storage capacity for batteries and all that. It's working on it. And then, of course, the cost issue too. You can't really bring solar power industry up to scale until the costs come down, and that continues to be a challenge.
Well, thank you, Michael. Before we close our conversation, do you have anything to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm surprised you didn't bring up the whole cricket story. The U.S. is, of
Well,
course,
I did
cricket.
not go to the cricket team because I'm not a fan. I do not know much about cricket because I grew up in this country. But Sri Lanka just had some kind of a cricket team, and I also got the invitation from the Deputy Secretary of State Rishi Verma to attend it, but I cannot attend it because I have to go see Senator Cory Booker. Then after that, I have to see Senator President Biden. I saw President Obama 2 days ago.
Hmm. Oh, that's
That
great. That's terrific.
that man is fantastic. He's still as eloquent as it was before.
That's great. No, he definitely has some very there's a lot that he can offer in terms of his insights for sure.
And I hope that this administration takes advantage of that, and they will, as I
Hmm.
understand.
Interesting. Wow.
So let me conclude the conversation. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.